Fiber, it helps you poop. Were those not the details that you've never heard? Well, all right. It turns out fiber probably does more than just impact your bathroom habits. In fact, across multiple analyses, including up to 83 studies, fiber may have an effect on the old ticker by affecting your blood pressure. But before we get into the clinical data, it's always nice to brush up on how fiber is proposed to impose its blood pressure effects. And then we'll discuss why some data indicate fiber does not have an effect, yet other data indicates that it does have an effect. The Great Fiber Conspiracy. Fiber, which is a weakly digested carbohydrate found in plants, translates into proposed blood pressure reducing effects through its effects on our microbiome, a grouping of trillions of microorganisms like bacteria that are found on and in your body. More specifically, fiber is known to affect the gut microbiome found in your intestines. Fiber is known to be bifidogenic, which, if you're anything like me, you find that word completely uninformative. It means that the fiber promotes the growth of bifidobacteria, a bacterium linked to positive health outcomes. More specifically, fiber can be taken up by these microbes and converted into short-chain fats, so small fat molecules. These short-chain fats, like butyrate, are expelled from the microbe and absorbed by the intestinal wall cells called colonocytes. Once absorbed, short-chain fats can bind receptors found on the endothelial cells of the blood vessels. These are the cells that line your blood vessels and control blood pressure. These cells secrete different molecules that influence nearby cells, known as smooth muscle cells, to contract or relax. The relaxation of these smooth muscle cells opens the blood vessel, thereby reducing blood pressure. Now, short-chain fats derived from fiber bind to receptors on endothelial cells and convince them to secrete blood vessel relaxing molecules like nitric oxide. In that way, it's believed fiber reduces our blood pressure. But I should mention that there are many other mechanisms beyond this one that have been proposed, like the effect that short-chain fats have on insulin resistance, which also affects blood pressure indirectly, or short-chain fats also encourage the production of glucagon-like peptide from the intestinal cells. This glucagon-like peptide, or GLP-1, can also influence blood pressure by binding the kidneys, the heart, the blood vessels. There's much more, but what I've described is introduced in this analysis. I'd be happy to do a deeper dive into the various mechanisms of fiber if you're interested. For now, let's move on to some of the nuances of the clinical data, because there are some nuances to be had. I say this all the time, but we can't rely on mechanistic studies to speak to the true effect of something. For that, we need to rely on human trials. So, do the human trials corroborate the mechanisms that we discussed? Do they show a blood pressure lowering effect? Well, yes and no. Some do and some don't. For example, this analysis, including many randomized controlled trials, indicates fiber supplementation is ineffective at reducing certain blood pressure. We can see that here. The study's on the left side and the study results are on the right. The black square indicates the average effect of fiber supplementation versus placebo, or non-fiber inert substance. The dotted line above 0 indicates a no effect of fiber supplementation. So if the studies fall to the left, there is a reduction in blood pressure from fiber consumption. The overall diamond at the bottom is an easy way of pooling all the studies into one illustration. Overall, while the diamond seems to be moving left in favor of blood pressure lowering effects, the statistics indicate otherwise. There's no detected effect. Now, interestingly, another analysis shows the same results. It's a similar idea with the pooled estimate at the bottom indicating no effect, although it looks like it leans to the left. So, why are there so many mechanisms indicating fiber should provide a blood pressure lowering effect, yet two separate analyses indicate otherwise? Well, there's several reasons. Have you ever experienced frustration because 10 years ago researchers said one thing and sometime in the future they say something completely different? maybe even in the opposite of what they said before, this is a perfect example. Both the analyses that I showed you are from 2005. And while comforting that they agree almost to a T, they suffer from a few issues. And I'll get into some of the others in a bit, but the main one is that they include 24 and 25 randomized controlled trials. That is a lot of studies, but just because we perceive something as being a lot doesn't mean that it actually is sufficient data to detect an effect, if there were one. At the beginning, I promised you 83 studies, way more than what we have here. With 83 studies like in this analysis, which was published almost 20 years later, and more studies were published between 2005 and this analysis, indicates fiber does reduce blood pressure. We can see that here. Now, I'm not going to bog this down by describing each element of this table. Just know that by either way of analyzing the data, a strict pairwise comparison or a dose-response relationship, blood pressure is reduced with fiber exposure, as indicated by the minus numbers under the mean difference, MD, label on the top. Oh, also, I realize I said 83 studies, and for those that have some statistics background, you'll note the studies label there indicates 94 and 93 studies. That's referring to the study arms, not the number of studies exactly. A conversation for another day. Anyway, the point being that once you add much more data to the analysis, even what seems to be a robust analysis back in 2005, we gain more clarity on the truth, and we detect an effect where there might be one, something that we couldn't do in 2005. But if I'm honest with you, this analysis from 2005 did show a blood pressure lowering effect when looking at diastolic blood pressure. Here, same rules apply, and we see the overall effects diamond moves squarely to the left, indicating a reduction. So the previous data that I showed you was in systolic blood pressure, the top number on your blood pressure reading. And these data are diastolic blood pressure, the bottom number. Both are important, and this is also corroborated in the other 2005 analysis. Okay, so the takeaways here is that fiber does reduce blood pressure, but there's still more to say, because there's some key things that change how we look at this blood pressure lowering effect. In fact, fiber's blood pressure reduction effect may be conditional. I say that because if we pop open these analyses again and we look at the blood pressure lowering effects of fiber more closely, here we see that the benefits are outsized for one group of people and just about non-existent for another. Those two groups are the people most affected, people with high or normal blood pressure. As we can see by the data, the darker bars are the people with hypertension, so high blood pressure. And if the bars go down from the baseline of 0, that indicates a blood pressure lowering effect. Clearly, only those with hypertension experience a blood pressure reducing effect from fiber consumption. Both other analyses indicate similar results. So, does that mean that people who don't have high blood pressure can just kick fiber out of their diet? Well, if you're only concerned about blood pressure, it's true that fiber may not offer much for you. However, that assumes that fiber doesn't provide any other health benefits, which is an incorrect assumption. However, we can say that people who have high blood pressure should consider working on their fiber intake especially. Okay, how much fiber? And what are some sources of fiber? We'll get into that, but there's much more to this story than I can cover in this version of the video. I say this version because there's an extended version of this video that you're watching which covers more on the most effective fibers, if more fiber is necessarily better, differences in types of fiber, and some additional nuances on dosing, sourcing, and more. All of that is included with the Physionic Insiders, along with access to all my work, my research reviews, insider podcasts, and more, and written summaries of all the insider videos. Anyway, if you're interested in the full video, consider joining the Insiders. It's linked in the description. Now, what are good sources and how much to consume? In a non-exhaustive list, raspberries, blackberries, artichokes, peas, oats, black beans, lentils, chia seeds, Avocados are a few foods, although there are plenty of others. These will also allow you to fulfill the total amounts needed per day. On that front, amount needed, there's a few different recommendations, but the general recommendation is around 25 to 40 grams of fiber per day, on the lower end for women. According to this analysis, I'd argue the first 20 grams are the most impactful from a blood pressure standpoint. For more exact intake, the numbers are based on a per 1,000 calorie basis, around 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories consumed per day, if you know the amount that you consume per day, at least precisely. So overall, what's the short and sweet of it? Fiber has a mild blood pressure lowering effect, although the effect size is small to negligible if you don't have high blood pressure. If you do, the impact of fibers increase pretty substantially, around 3 to 5 point drop in blood pressure. The biggest bang for your buck is in the first 20 grams of consumption, although recommendations reach higher than that, around 14 grams per 1,000 calories consumed per day. And if you're concerned about heart health, I have plenty more publicly available material right here. Thanks for tuning in.